Here we are, episode 16, the Telos podcast, talking about I Kissed Christianity Goodbye. We're going to use a few case studies. There's some development in the news and the evangelical community, you could say. This would be speaking of the case of Josh Harris and Marty Sampson from Hillsong. And we definitely are not looking to make a big deal out of them, but to use them as a case study for a discussion on what is Christianity, what is faith, how do we navigate the trials of life and process doubt. It brings up a lot of issues that are worth discussing, and we're thankful for the opportunity. So I've got Dennis here to my left, Pastor Dennis. To my right, Pastor Steve Angelonis. His first time on with us. He's been involved with us from a distance since the beginning of this. Started late last year, our podcast. And Pastor Steve, welcome to the show.
Good to be here.
Thanks.
I guess we have an audience, right?
Yes.
So, sorry.
And Pastor Steve, can you give us your background story in a few minutes?
Background story. Okay, so you want a background story?
Yeah, we do.
Background story. Well, so 40 years ago, about 40 years ago, but 40 years ago I became a believer in Jesus Christ at a Pentecostal church here in the Baltimore area. I had grown up Catholic and, just became a believer and a Bible reader at that time. And so I was working as I was in college at that time, mass communications major at Towson State University, now Towson University, and then went on to a career as a sports writer, and then as an editor and a page layout makeup person in the newspaper business, spread out over, give or take, 26 years. So
that's the Baltimore Sun?
Well, that was one of them. That was the last one. Baltimore Sun was the last 19 years of my career. Yeah. Wow. Before that, I worked at a small paper outside of D.C. There was another paper in Baltimore called the News American. I worked for that one. There was a paper called the Evening Sun, which was owned by the same company as the Baltimore Sun. It just came out in the afternoon. I worked for that paper also. And, and then during that course of time, I went to Bible college, studied for ordination. In 2004, I was ordained as a pastor. And in 2006, I walked away from the newspaper business, primarily because they asked me to. They were looking to have younger people. And
he's not as old as he sounds right now.
So
we should note.
Well, anyway, just say they wanted to hire less experienced people at half the wage that I was making. Let's say it was a purely monetary decision, and a purely monetary decision on my part because I could leave and get a good severance package, and my wife had started a decent job at a hospital. So, and I became full-time minister. Working as an assistant to the pastor of our church, Greater Grace. Mm-hmm. And, I've done that for a while. I've taught in the Bible college here, taught in the Bible college first, teaching English and writing, and then later I've also taught church history. I've taught cultural anthropology, and I've taught Bible survey primarily. And so I have a wife of 36 years. I have 3 children who are in their 30s. They are all married with children. I have 7 grandchildren. So
very good.
That's the basic rundown. But yeah, I was just thinking about it 40 years ago today, not today, but 40 years ago in this general time frame, I went to a meeting, saw a movie about the end times, and wound up going to the altar to pray with somebody. Mm-hmm. Became a believer.
That was a very good summary, I must say. And we're thankful that you're on the show with us. Your voice is not 100%. And we definitely...
It's that cool gravelly thing.
It's not bad. We can work with it.
Okay.
And we do around here have a great respect for you and your teaching ministry and pastoral ministry at Greater Grace. And Pastor Dennis, we know well. He's been on many an episode here. So how can we start off this discussion? What do you guys think?
Yeah, that's a good question, because it is a big topic. And I think when we look across, the church here in the West, that we have this question a lot. And I like what you said is, how do we navigate trials, or how do we deal with our spirituality? And I think that a lot of people are having these moments of their life where they begin to wrestle with God. And we could point in one direction or the other direction, but nonetheless, the wrestle is real, right? So how do we deal with that? I think is very important.
Yeah, so we said we're calling this episode "I Kissed Christianity Goodbye," and this is, of course, playing off of the Josh Harris book from 1997, where he said, "I kissed dating goodbye," and that was a hit. I heard of it years ago. I was not looking at dating books in 1997. I was too young for dating at the time, but definitely have an idea just of what he was communicating there. Promoting sexual purity before marriage, promoting courtship. That was the word trying to emphasize. I'm not so familiar with it, but I've heard of a purity movement in the 90s, in part pushed back to the sexual liberation movement in the United States from the 60s and onward, I suppose. Pastor Steve would be good to comment on that, I think.
Well, I think, let's see. Yeah, so 1997, I was already married 14 years. So the idea, when I saw the book, I understood the principles that they were talking about. I think it's a principle that we had heard. We had heard it described as no-touch love, the idea. And I understood, I understood that. I mean, culturally, is it culturally possible? And that's the thing. It takes some work. It would take some work in the culture that we live in. It took some work. It would have taken some work in the culture if it had been introduced when I went. Because, I mean, when I went to the altar with my wife, it wasn't the first time I kissed her. And, I hadn't learned that doctrine. So that was the kind of thing. So is it culturally possible to live that way with the purity movement? I think what we have here was like a lot of things. It's a good idea. It definitely is sourced in what the Bible's saying. You could take verses and say that, but you're also putting a great emphasis on your own process or your own performance in this whole thing. And like, if you do this and wait for this, God is going to give you a wonderful girl. Your sex life is going to be out of this world because you didn't have anything to compare it to. And, this is just, it's like a prosperity kind of message for your relationships. But if anything that the Bible teaches, if you read the Bible, you know that relationships are messy, complicated, more complicated because of hardness of heart and sin, so just focusing on the Bible in terms of the relationship would have shown you that a relationship would be difficult. So I don't want to be I'm not an expert in this book. I haven't taken the time to really read it, but I think the popularity of it and the popularity of the person, he became, Josh Harris became a very popular speaker, conference speaker.
He was thrown in the limelight in his early 20s, right? So,
but, people will say, Spurgeon was pastoring a church at 16 and a large church.
Yeah, thousands of people.
And thousands of people. So I just want to, it's not the fact that he was youth. Youth is not a sin. The lack of humility would be a sin. I'm not saying Joshua Harris had a lack of humility. I'm just saying that sometimes, we talked about this before we started the recording this, is like boutique doctrine or pop theology that sort of has like a buzz to it, and I kiss dating goodbye. Oh, that's so awesome. it's got like a brand
He
to
got
it.
he got the title right. Yeah.
I got a brand. It's like, what would Jesus do?
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, you got the T-shirt slogan and everything, and it's away from the moorings of apostolic theology. So this is, I'm getting ready to teach church history. I'll start a week from Thursday, and I'm really like praying and focusing on making sure that, especially in this ancient church history segment that we're starting up, the first few classes is having people understand the source of our faith, which is the apostles who heard what Jesus said and told us what Jesus said, told us what Jesus did, and then told us what Jesus told them to do. And so, when this I Kiss Dating Goodbye, it's, it certainly is a message. It's, Jesus talked about marriage. He said God created one man, one woman at the beginning. He said angels aren't given in marriage. It's a purely human element, and but if you like take it, and I could say that about like the books that were popular when I was studying for the altar, so to speak. We had our book. We had
Marriage Prep.
Yeah, Marriage Prep. We got this book, The Act of Marriage, by Tim and Beverly LaHaye, and it was all about sex.
Oh, right. Yeah.
All about sex. And it was like, and my pastor counseling us, he said, don't read this book
Really?
until 6 weeks before the wedding. And
don't get too
it's
into
right.
it.
It's like you're 22 years old. My wife is 18 years old when we got married. She was 18. I was 22. And he was right. It's like, you like think, whoa, that is like heavy duty stimulation, and it's and this is in a doctrinal. I mean, all of this is tied to, Scripture and how the beauty of the marriage should be.
I watched the documentary that Josh Harris produced.
Mm-hmm.
It was came out 2 years ago, and I think he's even gone further since then. But he was already basically the whole documentary was a formal apology, and so that was the climax. At the end, he apologizes, and he wanted to go. His primary objective was to see how this affected people, and of course, he already had the presupposition that this mostly had a negative impact. So he's interviewing a lot on the on the documentary, and seeing how it was this ridiculous standard that could never be applied, and that was kind of the story after story, and how this affected the social settings in the church, like how the guys and gals couldn't get near each other, have natural relationships. Of course, this traumatized the dating scene in conservative Christian evangelical churches, you could say. So he basically says this overall had a negative impact, and I apologize for my book. It brings up the discussion of sexual purity before marriage. Are we still going to advocate that? How does one? I liked how you said it. Is it realistic in our culture? And we could talk about that, I think.
Is it realistic in our culture? The question is, that's maybe the wrong question. It's is it prosperous to be sexually pure? And the answer from the Bible is yes. And the answer from science is yes. It's much better to be married and bring children into the world. You don't
necessarily need a Bible or a pastor to tell you that either.
Yeah.
I mean, you could look at statistics and you could read the value of a family.
Yes.
The entity, how it stays together, that the father is around, that the mother is around. I mean, this is all statistics and science, like you were saying.
But I'm saying is I know that I say this in the college, I kissed a lot of girls. I was a serial dater, and kissing is a bear. It's I remember things. The mind is an amazing storehouse of stuff in your subconscious. So 15, 16 years old, you're drinking a few beers over behind Overley High School, and you get wild. It doesn't get totally physical, but it gets physical enough that you remember enough. So, so I didn't have sex with anyone else but my wife, but there was a lot of these kinds of encounters. And I could say anecdotally that some of those memories are definitely tools in my subconscious that can be a handle for the enemy to like bring to my subconscious. This is why you have problems in your marriage bed, because you used to do that back at the track. Yeah. And it's like, in some ways I'm saying, is it realistic? Okay. The fact of the matter is that we've never seen James Bond write a child support check. And we know the amount of women that he slept with in the series has to be astronomical. So I'm just saying, like,
it's at least 2 per
that's
movie.
Not, the culture is not presenting a realistic picture of sex. So is what I'm saying,
The bill is footed by the crown 100%.
Oh, I guess that's right, because he's licensed to kill. But I think, is it profitable? Is it profitable to steer teenagers and everything away from, like, premarital relationships in this way? Anecdotally, I can say yes, because some of these things hang with you, even when you didn't know anything about doctrine. I wasn't in a church. I was going to Catholic church. I mean, I had a great Catholic church. I had a great couple of spiritual experiences there. That's for another show. But I'm just thinking that, the question is, like, is it realistic? Okay. It's always been, this sensuality kind of thing has always been a problem in human society, and it was a problem during the Roman era when Christianity was born. So it wasn't like Christianity has had like this kind of thing over everything. Christianity was introduced into a wild orgy-filled culture, very homosexual, very promiscuous, and also, there were postpartum abortions. Children were left to die on the hills outside of Rome. So this is not a new thing. It's like the ministry of the gospel was introduced to a sexualized culture.
One translation of the New Testament is that Jesus says, and they will know you by your sexual purity. No, I just made that up. How about you get in on this, Dennis?
I just think it goes like back to the beginning, like relationships are messy. And you could talk about it too, like our relationship with God is messy also. So we could like point it back to this one topic. This one topic is a part of my whole relationship with God. And is there a right or is there a wrong? We could say, yes, there is a right and a wrong in my relationship with God. We could open the Bible, and the Bible tells me many things that are right and wrong. But also at the same time, it is very, very messy. So even actually, let's use the topic of relationships. Let's say my relationship gets messy. Does that mean I am no longer saved? Does that mean now I'm no longer a Christian, that I can't go to church, that I can't have a deep relationship with God? And I think the answer is, the Bible teaches us, is that there is grace, that we can, turn, and that we can have a relationship with God nonetheless, because relationships are messy. So God isn't expecting me here to be perfect and to have a problem-free walk with him. He's expecting problems. And the point is like, how do I walk through those problems? Here is Joshua Harris. He is going through a situation in his life.
There's a divorce involved.
Yeah, it's ugly,
And he's, him and his wife are both like making a shift in their faith.
Yeah. But he's not the first one to walk away from God.
Yeah.
And he's not the first one to walk away from God and then maybe come back. Now, that's the other thing. I was looking at Hebrews chapter 5, and the writer of Hebrews says, like, because of this, he is required, as for other people, also for himself to offer sacrifices for sin. And no man takes himself honor. Oh, sorry, I'm reading the wrong verse. Verse 2, it says, since he himself is also subject to weakness. Now, here is the writer of Hebrews talking about a pastor, and we're talking about a leader here who is pastoring people. Through books and through his life, he is leading and guiding people. And he'd be foolish to sit there and say, like, I am not subject to this weakness. Like, look at me. Look at what I wrote. Look at what I am doing. Look at how much I study the Bible. Does that all of a sudden now negate the fact that I am human? And it's true. I'm walking through this life. It is messy, and I'm going to get my hands dirty. I'm going to fall on my face. And I need to understand that.
So this is bringing up other subjects, obviously, like sexual purity before marriage, which is important. I guess Josh Harris, Marty Sampson from Hillsong, also saying I'm open to doubt. I'm putting my faith on the table and saying, and these guys, they call it deconstruction.
Mm-hmm.
And you're familiar with the term, Pastor Steve?
I mean, I've just noticed that it's starting to crop up.
Yeah.
I mean, can you define it for me?
So
does it mean you implode your faith to start all over again?
I know. I asked someone that considers himself a person that is going through this, and is it like Descartes' illustration of the apples in the basket? Mm-hmm. You know, you dump the basket and then you start over and inspect each apple and reinsert it one at a time. That's like a hyper-skepticism, I suppose. Like I can't, because I'm not sure anymore, I can't even play with it at the moment. I got to start over. I got to start from ground zero, sort of thing. Mm. And so that's what these guys are opening the door to for a lot of young people. Why don't you think for yourself, kind of like, why don't you process your faith independently from Christians, maybe even take yourself out of that setting for a little while? And I guess that's mostly my primary concern, and something I'd like to have you speak on as well.
I mean, it's cool too, because you go back to having like a theology that's from the apostles, apostolic, theology. I mean, what was their theology like? And it was, I mean, if you look in the origin of the church, it was kind of not developing, but they had other issues. They weren't sitting there hashing out, theology so much. They were living their life and they knew what they believed, and then it was solidified later, And here we are, it's like we were making like major things, like minor things major, and I think if we were to go back to some simple things in our walk with God, I think it'd be a lot better for us.
Yeah, that's if your faith has a sure foundation, right? And that's what we're questioning. Like, where's the foundation of your faith? Was it in your opinions on sexual?
Right. Yeah.
That's the thing. Yeah. I mean, if he felt like a failure when he when he started thinking, of having an affair with someone, if he felt like a failure, and if that created a sense of dissonance in his head, that could have been the thing that changed him, because his works process of living this what is it? What's the right thing? He is the kiss dating goodbye. This is his identity. And if you don't have the proper foundation, okay. So doubt. I think we respect people. We honor people. We understand everyone wrestles with their relationship with God. It's a messy thing.
Yeah.
And when you read through the Psalms, you see David using very strong language with God. Look at Jonah. You have Jonah just telling God, I am very right to be angry. This is not like a new phenomenon. Mm-hmm. The book of Ecclesiastes is a man who's like totally wondering if God did the right thing in making this planet, because nothing ever seems to go right. Oppressors get away with stuff. Good people get hurt. It's like this is a thing. And like simple apostolic doctrine is do we believe that what they presented to us is worth resting our lives on? And that's a question all of us have to answer for ourselves. Now we respect the process. I don't mind the process. What I do mind is, like, in your deconstruction, there are some that are looking back at us and saying that living by simple apostolic doctrine just doesn't work. And that it does work. It's worked for thousands of years, for hundreds of people, millions of people. And I'm not saying work is like a bad term. Like, you go through the whole Bible, you have like examples of people who wrestled with who they were in Christ, who they were serving God. And I don't want to diminish that. Doubt is like a very important part of the process. Like, okay, so I'm just going to say this is John 15 says that Jesus told all the apostles, you have not chosen me, I have chosen you. Okay, so if we believe that simple statement of truth from Jesus' lips, if you believe that Jesus really spoke those words, because there's a couple of guys out there who say that we can't really be sure if Jesus really spoke those words. Mm-hmm. So you have to come to an understanding of who the person of Christ is in your life first. So have you settled that issue?
Yeah.
But if Jesus said, I have chosen you, you have not chosen me, then that's an infinitely secure statement in like, it wasn't really based on anything I did. So now Joshua is saying, Joshua Harris and others are saying, well, we don't believe in you, Jesus. And does that nullify everything that has happened in their lives?
Right.
And I don't believe it does.
Right. Theoretically speaking, not certain of these individial people, Josh Harris or Marty Sampson, but this is doctrine that we teach, and this is how we understand, is that if an individual is born again, saved by the Spirit, saved by the blood, indwelt by the Spirit, then it's a done deal. You are adopted into the family of God. So we believe and promote the teaching of eternal security, and that's an important part of this discussion. So some might argue, was the individual never saved? Ever saved? Some will take that position.
Some are already throwing out that word. They went out from among us. The same John who said, who wrote, I have not chosen you. You have not chosen me, I have chosen you. The same John writes in another one of his writings that they went out from among us because they were not of us.
Right.
And some are saying that's to mean saved. And I'm saying, you got to read some of the context in there is like, there has always been doubt and disagreement and competing factions in Christianity.
Yeah.
It's always been that way. So, to say that John is saying, see, they left us because they were never really saved, is to really to bring that down to a real reductionist kind of interpretation. John is really talking about, they're not really of the same spirit with us.
Yeah, like
they're
a unity
not
thing.
one with us. Yeah, the union is not there. They have the Holy Spirit, but the human spirit with them, our church split a couple times. This church that we're a part of has split a couple times. It's like they went out. Well, we say that some of these guys are not saved. I said, we don't say those kinds of things.
Oh, yeah.
So,
right. And we don't even know about Josh Harris's leaving of Jesus, but he's leaving of Christian practice and Christian and church. You know what I mean? Like, so that's maybe not 100% evident in his wording, because you can obviously, well about language as a writer, you can craft something to...
You can make anything say anything.
Right. And I don't, and we don't know, and it's not really, it's his business, but since it's blown up on the internet and in Christian circles, the Christian Post and all these organizations writing on it, it's worth discussing. I'm in favor of questioning and critical thinking and processing as an individual faith, So I actually think that's very important, especially for second generation believers. Like they came into I know we don't really say that like they are second generational believers, but just the idea of being born into a church, into a Christian context, into a Christian family, those people all the more are going to need to process it for themselves. I really encourage that.
There's a difference too between like cultural Christian and then people who are born in a church that are Christian, and then there's a big difference, I think, because you go down the streets, you can meet people and they say that they are Christian, and maybe they go to church once a year or something, and maybe they are a Christian, but we could kind of label that culturally Christian. And there's this whole other group that of kids, or now we could say adults that were kids that grew up in the church. They went, and now as an adult, they continue to go. So what I like what you're saying is, now at my life, I have grown up in the church. I don't have these other influences that are so prominent in my life. Now, how do I make this faith my own? Which is part of that critical thinking. Because here is this faith I've learned about. I've been in Sunday school. I've even been to a few Bible colleges classes. And it's like, okay, now I understand what it is saying. But is it mine?
Yeah.
And that's what I love about the Apostle Paul is he actually calls it his gospel. It's not that he was preaching something new or different, but that it was so personal to him. And this is like something that I think is very interesting. Like we are very individualistic as Americans.
Yeah.
And that has an effect on our faith. So, I mean, maybe we could talk, maybe it'd be fun to talk about that is like being individualistic, but at the same time, having the faith be my own. Like there is a difference there.
The faith be your own, which is an individualistic statement.
Yeah, it could be, you know.
And then understanding the body of Christ, right?
Yeah.
And then also navigating a world of sin, which the church is well planted in, you know, like although we preach of another kingdom, the church has a...
Because we live in a society, I mean, where people are very, you know, in one way they're very spiritual. They want something in their life, and they're very conscious of that. And they're promoting something spiritual in their life, whether it be God or something else. They're promoting something, you know, and I think people, you know, and they kind of have that idea like, okay, if it works for you, that's great. I'm very happy for you. And you could have a great conversation about spiritual things with somebody, but they're not God conscious in that sense at all.
Mm.
You know what's so funny about the Marty Sampson thing, and this was just last week, and once again, we really respect these guys for what they're going through, and if they're going to be vocal, then we can talk about it. You know, they're obvious, so we're respecting them, but we're also using it for a discussion. But Marty Sampson was like very vocal on his Facebook, or on his Instagram, all over the place, going back to his posts, editing, deleting, removing, and then reposting. So this is very much live. We're watching it live, you know, on the internet, and I've been following it, and he's really trying to promote love in the absence of judgment, you know. And my question lingering in the back of my head this past week is, could he not find that love in Christianity? You know, he's almost like, it's almost like he's discovering love absent from judgment now that he's stepped away from his faith.
Well, I mean, that's the great mystery of the church is it's made up of people, and you introduce people to every situation, and they're fallen, and that's, you know, I mean, love absent of judgment. Like, well, I don't think you can say that. I mean, love absent of judgmentalism. You know, you're looking for. It seems. Now, I haven't read as much as you have read about this. It seems that, you know, I read some of it where he says, I haven't seen enough miracles. I haven't seen enough love. I've seen too much sin in the church. And so, and I understand that. And, you know, but what about the person of Christ? You
so
know?
For him, it's like a breaking, like of disappointment. He's just kind of breaking
well, of course it is.
under disappointment.
I mean, I've been really disappointed with church. Every church I've been in, I've been disappointed in, including this one. I've had moments.
It's not going to change.
It's not going to change. I mean, I've had. Now, I'm not. You know, I'm not a superhero or anything like that. I'm not going to. You know, and you have to figure the challenges that people are facing. These guys are facing. They're very real challenges. I hope there isn't like any sort of self penance going on here. Like if I just say I'm sorry enough for the damage that I've caused. You know, like if I just apologize enough, maybe I can scale back some of the damage that I caused. The fact is that, you know, things have consequences. And, you know, you preach something, if you preached it in the wrong spirit, you know, you can't go back and unpreach it, and you can't come back and like preach it in the spirit again. You could, I guess. You can do that.
Okay.
You can get up and preach it in the right kind of spirit. But
that's a good point. I mean, these guys were on the stage,
yeah,
and now they're like, I don't like what I was doing, or the spirit. I didn't think I was right. I didn't think it was of God. So now it's like they kind of need to be counseled in that, how to handle that. You know, like,
well, you know, Bob Dylan became a Christian,
right?
He released 2 Christian albums. It was like everyone like was trying to push him and then he stepped away from all of that, like the superstardom. Like, oh, Bob, look at what you could do for us. he didn't want to have a part in that at all. You know,
He didn't want to use his platform
Yeah.
for Christianity.
and he didn't. Well, I mean, he did. He just, he was an artist. And this was the period in time. Artist. He did 2 albums this way, and then he went on with his life. And as far as I know, he's still a believer, but he doesn't talk about it this way. It's like he didn't become like he didn't become Bob Dylan's going to do like the
Open for Billy Graham or
yeah,
something.
open for Billy Graham kind of thing. It's like that's and I'm sure there's like huge Dylan fans out there, and I know a couple of them, and they would, if they're listening to this, I could be corrected on which way he's gone since that. But I know that he's a very private person. He doesn't really talk about his faith or what challenged him in that situation.
So I guess my question is, why couldn't Josh Harris just say, "Hey, I apologize for my views. I no longer agree with them." We could argue that maybe his book had some good intention and principles worth communicating. Maybe it was legalistic. Maybe it didn't have to be talked about the way he talked about it, or setting a fixed standard. That's up for discussion, but that's not what we have here. It's like it's like a total walking away.
Well, it's interesting because the stage now for people is so huge. I mean, your circle of influence is, 10 years ago was much smaller than it is now, because now everything is on Facebook, Instagram, and you become very popular very fast. So it's actually kind of like interesting that a Christian musician can be famous, because before, Christian musicians didn't make money.
Exactly.
Guys like Michael W. Smith, these guys who sang before they could make money being musicians.
Bob Dylan played harmonica on a Keith Green album. And that was I had a buddy at the Baltimore Sun who had seen Bob Dylan 69 times or something like that, had every album that Bob Dylan ever had, but the Keith Green album. I completed his collection.
Nice.
Because I had 2 copies. And I brought it there. There was a drawing in it. Joe Zucker,
Yeah.
Dan's father, drew a picture of Bob Dylan that went in the album liner notes.
Uh-huh.
And so that was like you said, back then it was the
world was much smaller in one way.
Yeah.
So now I just feel like the pressures are greater. Like you have a greater responsibility and a greater weight on your shoulders when you're out there doing these kind of things.
Well, celebrity does it on any level. I mean, celebrity brings with it the invasion of privacy.
Yeah.
And, if Joshua Harris became some sort of Christian celebrity, then we do bear some responsibility for that, for making him larger than life.
Yeah.
And so, yes, he could say that. We could say, we're sorry. You had a good book. We're sorry that we made you this kind of person. We could, those people could say that. And that's the question. Do I hold that against him? See, that's the thing, is your own biblical literacy is really the best defense. And that's why when we were talking, that's a pop doctrine. I kiss dating goodbye. It's a pop doctrine. But what is the biblical theology of redemption? Let's go back to the creed. Do you believe in God the Father? Do you believe in the Holy Spirit? Do you believe in the virgin birth? Do you believe what the apostles and those early church Christians hung on so tightly to, that they were willing to give their lives for? So, that's where I'm thinking about, as a person, if I'm thinking about, do I have it in me? Am I settled in my faith and my relationship with Christ itself if my church were to close up shop tomorrow?
Yeah.
If my pastor, the previous pastor in our church, if he has Alzheimer's and starts saying some interesting things, would what he taught me the previous 20 years, did I learn enough, from the Bible to get it? And it sounds simplistic to say.
That's why I was going to use that word. I was going to use that word, simplistic, but it's beautiful.
Yeah. I think the more complicated things become, the more room there is for deceit, deception, destruction, weakness. When things are very simple, and the simple faith is Jesus Christ. Who do you say that I am? Do you have that conviction in your heart that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God? Then do you believe what he said about himself? And do you believe what he said about the Bible? But I never start, this is what the Bible says about Jesus. You should believe it because this is what the Bible says. I'm saying, do you know who Jesus is? You can learn who Jesus is right here, right now, and ask him to show you who he is because he's beyond the Bible. And this was like maybe the confusion that Andy Stanley got into for he doesn't believe the Bible. And Andy Stanley is saying, no, I'm just saying that if you're trying to get people to believe in Jesus by telling them to just read the Bible, it doesn't really work that way. They gotta, if they're going to understand the Bible, they got to believe in who Jesus is.
Yeah.
And so he got into a little bit of controversy. Some like theologians like jumped on saying, what are you saying? And I was, so he had to make some explanations too. It's the popularity thing, Sorry.
You're accountable. But I mean, for me, like being on the mission field for 8 years, like life was very simple in that sense.
Mm-hmm.
Like you get to know your Bible, you get to know prayer, and your issues with people, in the sense of like how do they relate to God, are very simplistic. And then I come back here, and it's like a whole different world.
Yeah.
I think also to say like simplistic doesn't mean you're not thinking. Because some people say, well, you're so simplistic, you're not thinking about these kind of things. It's like, well, no, these things aren't really an issue. I don't see how these are an actual issue.
Yeah.
It's more of a focus and clarity of thought, and the issues are settled for you so that you don't have to calculate a million things every day.
Yeah, or maybe I believe in something, so therefore I don't have to argue every little jot and tittle,
Yeah, so in my opinion, it's like, is Joshua Harris' life like wasted? And we would say no. I think all of us, we have a finished work perspective that if you are a believer in Jesus, you can make your bed in hell and God is with you. Jesus told the story of the prodigal son. The prodigal son went to a far country, spent a lot of things, a lot of things he learned in the house. And I'm thinking there's a lot of young people grew up in Christian homes. I understand. I don't understand because I didn't grow up in a totally Christian home, nominally Christian. Yes, we believe in Jesus Christ. We went to the Roman Catholic Church. I went and said all the prayers to the Mass, First Communion. I believed in Jesus as an entity. Did I have a full relationship with him? No, not until I was almost 19. But, my prayer for Joshua Harris is that, if you wind up in a pig pen somewhere after all of this, that anyone who's gone away from the faith, if you left the house of God, a place where you've learned a lot of good things and seen a lot of ugly things, yes. Mm-hmm. And I'm sorry that you've seen ugly things, but the grace message brings the ugly. It attracts the ugly. And look at the apostles, look at Joseph and his brothers. Come on, look at,
Yeah.
And so I'm saying, like, I'm believing that Jesus said, smoking flax cannot be quenched. Whatever light is in a person is there forever. And Jesus, if you're out in a pig pen, you could come to yourself and realize that there is a house you belong to and a Father who cares for even those who work for him, not even just those who are related to him. And that's a promise. And I'm thinking, as people of God, I don't want to be judgmental. I don't want to gloat. I'm not going to say, I told you so. I'm not going to be the elder brother and not celebrate with you when you come back to the house.
Mm-hmm.
But I do understand. I want to respect and honor the dignity of people to fail and to have wrong opinions, or I should say not wrong opinions, different opinions. Okay.
Yeah.
So when I say wrong, I'm putting a value judgment on that. You have different opinions from me, and my opinion of my life is built on what I believe about the person of Christ. And I'm going to keep building my life upon my opinion about the person of Christ.
Mm-hmm.
and what I learned from the people who heard him say those things.
From the church's perspective, I mean, being in the church, like, I want to foster a safe space for people to open up and say, I don't understand. I don't know if I agree, and allow for these discussions to happen, especially because of the internet. They're going to happen one way or the other. We can't stop people from thinking, and we don't want to. It's the opposite. We want to encourage thought. We want people to be able to love God with their minds and not check their brains at the door. Like, there's a good book on that subject. And to be gracious when someone is doubting, like you were saying, there's many biblical examples. And think of John the Baptist, of all people, the forerunner for Christ, and he is like in prison wondering, are you the one, or should we look for another? Like, that's shocking. It's amazing that that's in our Bible, actually, to think of. And Jesus was extraordinarily gracious in that circumstance towards him. And that's what we want to be too. And we're not caught up in this. We really aren't. But to say in this moment, for many that might be going through something similar as to Josh Harris or Marty Sampson, and there's others, but I just haven't looked them up or seen or heard their stories, that you are okay to doubt. You're okay to sit on the sidelines for a little bit even. Maybe you got to pull out of, if you're active in ministry, maybe you got to pull out for a year and say, I need to think, refocus. I need to be loved by people. I need to rediscover the love of God. There's room for any of those options, right? And I think that's the most important message right now for these people.
Yeah, I mean,
I think these things too in life mean a lot more, or can be more damaging with or without relationships. Like part of what's going on in my life, part of my process of thinking, because you're receiving thoughts from somebody else. When you're going through this process of doubt or process of being critical of your faith, you're getting your information from somewhere. And it doesn't really matter where, actually. But how much more does that information mean to you when you receive it from somebody who has invested in you? Like, there has to be a relationship connected to the information.
Yeah, but it could just be intellectual inquiry, right?
Yeah, of course.
Like, I just need to I don't understand this. This doesn't make sense. So then in that case, anyone could be your teacher, right?
Yeah, but I think with some people, I mean, you could ask a question, but there's something deeper than the question. There's your spirit, there's your soul. If you're asking this question and your soul isn't being touched, you can get the answer, and then what you do with it is up to you, right? Mm-hmm. But when your soul is touched, it means a whole lot more, actually. It affects you much differently than just some information or inquiry. Mm-hmm. And I feel like maybe it's possible that we could be judgmental, in this way, and then all of a sudden, this thought process that this person is having now is validated because we're being judgmental because they're asking a question, versus us helping them through the question. Whether they end up believing what I believe or not, I'm helping them through the question, and that is relationship-based, not informational-based.
Well, I liked what you said. Like, if they go to another source, it's going to be they're going to have their own biases, right? And they're going to have their own worldview coming at you with their perspective.
Right.
So that has to be taken into a calculation. Like, there's no worldview vacuum, like a place where there's no presuppositions coming into play.
Yeah.
So we got to be critical thinkers and develop thinking skills to process information in life. And for some, that's like diving into apologetics. Learning how to rational arguments for the faith, the historicity of Christ, the validity of the Gospels as being primary sources of information.
But I mean, those are all those all basically come down to opinion. Also, it's like you form your opinions and you form your the historicity and all that stuff. Yeah, it's those kinds of things are out there. People challenging. Every year, every new year is a new challenge to who Jesus is, and
Christmas and Easter.
Yeah.
There's all these articles pop up, right?
So it's just again, it just comes down to I think a personal relationship with God. I've you tear the veil off of all of that and just say, okay, you're looking for a reason not to believe.
Yeah.
And and I I use the book of Ruth as an example because Naomi taught something around the table that sunk into the person Ruth. But then when all of the disaster happened and Naomi changed her thinking about the God that she had worshipped as a child, even telling one of the other daughters-in-law, go back and worship the gods of the Moabites, even kicking her out of her life, saying, go back, the God that I serve isn't real. See, the thing is that Ruth did not buy the new Naomi, the Mara, the bitter Naomi. And I'm just saying, all of us are going to get into these situations where we're bitter. If we haven't gotten into those circumstances, that's where we really meet God. And that's where it's the scriptural memorization and the categorization in our minds may be thrown off whack, and it really needs to come back to a personal relationship and the Holy Spirit. And can I believe God for who he is? Just because I believe he is who he is, and I don't even, I don't know what I believe anymore. Can I talk to God like that? And I think you're right. A church needs to be a place where that people can feel that way. I don't even know if I believe God is who he says he is, because my son's an alcoholic. I just can't believe it. I did the best I could to raise my children, and I just can't believe the disaster that their lives are. And my husband and then my mother and all this, and where is God in all this?
Yeah, no one wants to kill the party. Everyone's worshiping God and excited about Jesus and studying their Bibles, and then Pope says I need help. I don't get.
Well, it can't be that way. I mean, church. I'm saying church world fails at that sometimes, but that's not to look at that and say, okay, don't look at church world and then let church world obscure everything about Christ,
right?
That is said, that he said about himself, and that is said in the book.
Yeah.
And don't miss all the great stories that are there of all the sinful people who found a loving God, and it worked out and it changed them. And then sometimes it didn't work out.
Yeah.
Poor Jeremiah. We don't really know. No one listened to him. They dragged him off to Egypt, and he got killed, even though he stood for God in the whole thing. It's you got the rawest of raw deals. But he's the one that writes, great is thy faithfulness, your mercies are new every morning.
Yeah. We really can't base our experience on the reality of who God is, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's the tendency as we look around us. And we could say, well, I understand my personal circumstances are bad, but my church's circumstances shouldn't be bad.
Yeah.
I can fail myself and God can fail me, but God can't fail my church. So therefore, if the church fails, then, now all of a sudden I have a new definition of who God is. Yeah. Or even do I even believe in him now because of that failure?
Well, yeah, it's personal frustration, and you take it out on your spouse or something, or whoever's the nearest thing is going to get whacked.
Well, it's, we just, the complications from information overload, those kinds of things, right? It's just people don't really have a clear, definitive kind of open situation to come and present their problems and have people listen with kindness, with generosity, with care. And, we just, instead of just pushing Bible, just read these Bible verses and everything. I'm as guilty of that, I'm sure. I'm sure I've done that in the past, and, but I can't go back and change it. And that's the thing. I wrote a blog a few years ago about cutting off people's ears, Jason Gray sings a song about cutting off people's ears, so I wrote this blog. I have cut off people's ears. I've been personally responsible for not letting people hear the clear message of the gospel for one reason or other, because I was too legalistic, because I didn't want them to interrupt my time with my pastor or this thing. But I can't go back and change that. I can ask forgiveness, and I can ask God to restore the years that have been wasted. And I can ask God, you are bigger than me, and you understand my repentance here. Could you send somebody to that person because of my prayer, even though I can't go back and make right what I did wrong years ago?
Well, that perfectly applies to Josh Harris. Like, God is bigger than your book.
Yes.
I mean, like, it does need to be said. And I was getting that vibe watching his documentary that he was like, oh my God, like, I fundamentally shifted evangelical Christianity in America. And it's like, okay, yes, you had an impact, but like, don't overstate your influence. I mean, it doesn't come out well. It doesn't look well.
Well, it's interesting because my father was a youth pastor in that era.
Yeah.
And there was, that book was being passed around, and then there were this band that was in the neighborhood, and they went around singing these songs, and it was kind of that message also, to staying pure, don't let anybody touch you. And there was also this other thing, I forget the name of it, but you would take this vow and wear a ring,
Yeah.
And my parents were heavily involved in that. And in one sense, we could say, like, God is bigger. Is there things wrong with that? I mean, I don't know so much, actually. But I do know that whole thing clearly affected, like, who I am today, even though I was so young.
Yeah, and we had our own version, like we said earlier, the no-touch love. Greater Grace had its own
and that whole
version.
message, I mean, it helped my walk with God. It also helped my walk with my wife,
So, is it realistic? For maybe a lot of people, no, but is it profitable?
Yeah.
The fact is, the message is profitable.
Yeah, it's wisdom. Yeah, it is.
So God's bigger than your book, whether it was good or bad. I mean, who's here to stand and judge, actually? Because God is bigger.
Yeah.
I mean, you preach a message. Is it good or bad? I mean, it was a terrible message. Yeah, but God is bigger, because somebody walks away and they're healed nonetheless.
But we don't want to create an environment where men and women can't touch each other because touch is all sexually charged.
Well, I just, I think, whatever. I mean, I'm just saying,
But the principle of guarding your heart and the not making sexual advances
and the romantic element of human relationships have been like, really, there's been a lot invested in that over the course of time. And the Bible has a book on it. It's Song of Solomon. It's like very touchy-feely.
Yeah.
Very, very much. So you can't get into that book without really understanding a man's insanely in love with his wife and wants to be with her in every possible way. So, I'm just saying, I think like the human relationship development system, how, is there a perfect one? I mean, has there ever been a perfect one? Love potion number 9.
No.
It never was invented. I mean, it is. And is that, what's that do for someone who's called to be not married?
Yeah,
and live
the 1 out of 10.
Living as a single person over the course of his lifetime. There needs to be a validation for all of that, Yeah. So there needs to be character involved in that. And I am saying, like, Joshua Harris, sometimes you could be overwhelmed by what you feel you did wrong. And we can all be overwhelmed with what we feel like we've done wrong. You can't undo all of that, but you're right.
Yeah. I think we could all say, like Josh Harris, our views have developed over time. Like, okay, so his views developed over time. Okay, I can say that for myself, and I'm sure many Christians can say their views have developed over time. So it's just that he had more impact than any of us have.
Well, I think, if he was was he a homeschooled person too?
I think so. And
okay, so I mean, this is
he came out of that.
Yes, if you're from my era, I'm I'm like,
I was homeschooled, so be careful what you say now.
No, I'm just saying.
I'm a hybrid.
Okay, I'm just going to go somewhere here. It's probably
Go ahead.
This will take off worse. But okay, the principle of vaccinations is an introduction of a small amount of a disease,
Right.
so that the body can learn how to fight it and develop the antibodies to it. Chickenpox vaccine, measles vaccines. Now, whatever your thing, this is the principle of it. And I'm thinking, like, in some situations, how you are raised, sometimes do you get a vaccination? Like, are you totally shut off from the world that you never,
Yeah.
My granddaughter got infant botulism, an infinitely rare disease. The serum cost something like $180,000, one dosage of serum. It fixed her. But it's like, well, why did this happen? Well, because she inhaled so many spores at a certain age that usually she would have inhaled one or two here and there, and slowly her body would have developed. Like, there's botulism on your phone right now. Did you know that? Botulism.
Yes,
But she wasn't old enough. So I'm just saying, like, it's like, this is like, as parents and everything, like the kind of like exposing
Proper healthy exposure.
No, it's very good.
I agree.
Vaccination, learning, like it says, love not the world, but like you can enjoy the world in terms of artistic things.
Sure.
And in certain ways. And you can, my children tell stories when we were driving home from Christmas Eve, and they would ask questions about, why does Uncle, let's see, I got to use a name that's not real. Why does Uncle Billy act like that? And before I could answer, Jean Marie says, well, why do you think he acts like that? He says, well, he's okay at the beginning, but then he drinks a few beers, and then he's like, and my mother, and my wife, the mother, said, ridiculous? Yes. And she just said, I'm telling you, this is what happens to some people when they drink a beer.
Right.
And my mother said, not everybody is like that, but this happens to some people. And she says, when you grow older, you're going to have to make choices. So there's an introduction
helping
of
them process.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what might be lacking, and what could aid to them being able to process faith later on in life, right? 20s and 30s, the current millennial crowd, you could say. And we don't, in closing here, we're wrapping it up now. This episode is meant to foster and help direct the conversation, not providing any definitive, this is the end of the conversation. I hope our episodes get people thinking, get people talking. Disagreement gets the conversation going pretty good. So if there's a little disagreement, that we're happy with that as well, because the conversation continues, and that's what we're all about. So thank you guys for joining us. Great hour with you. Have a great